why don't we get started? So, my name is Adam Miller, and I just want to thank everyone for coming today. We really appreciate it, and this is definitely a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I've noticed a big problem around, campus and especially at Penn State. So, thank you for attending this. I'm a third-year finance major at Penn State, and I work for the Sokolov-Miller Financial and Life Skills Center, and I've been working here since my freshman fall. And since freshman year, I have noticed, how present gambling is around campus, especially sports betting and casinos. And when I turned 21 in September, that became even more real. Started to see how it affected people around me and even myself. Even, going to bars, I noticed there was gambling app promotions there. It's everywhere. So early November, I brought this to our center's attention, and we agreed Penn State, has resources, and we want to make sure people know that these resources are out there. But also, we want to help students realize the impact gambling can have, and especially during college. So that brings us to our panel today. We're incredibly lucky to have five experts on the issue, and they're here to talk about their resources and how they can help, but also the psychological impacts of gambling and what to do if you or someone you know is struggling. So I'll quickly introduce our panelists and then we'll dive right into questions. Starting with Jason. Jason Yoder is a licensed clinical social worker and a counseling psychological service chat coordinator. And he facilitates group and individual sessions for CAPS and specializes in problem gambling and sports betting. John Mitchell, he's a licensed clinical psychologist and assessment coordinator at Penn State Counseling and Psychological Services, so that's just CAPS. And he serves as CAPS alcohol and other drug treatment team. Also serves with the community agencies in areas of crisis negotiation and threat assessment and management. And is also a consumer of sports betting. So hopefully he could provide more insight on his perspective and his clinical perspective in general. Mike Miltenberger is an assistant director in health promotion and wellness, along with alcohol and cannabis education services. He conducts a free 1 hour problem gambling sessions for students utilizing the screening and brief intervention and referral to treatment. And then Julie Heaton. Julie Heaton works with me at the Sokolov-Miller Family Financial Life Skills Center. She's a certified financial counselor and academic life coach and specializes in helping students navigate consumer debt. And yeah, so we could dive right into the questions. Just a quick onboarding. There's a Q&A function, so if anyone has any questions, we'll try to answer them throughout the panel. But also, if you have any questions that we can answer live to you, we'll leave an extra 10 minutes at the end to answer those as well. So, getting right into it, first we're going to define the problem. And my first question to our panelists is, how big has sports betting become, and how big of a problem is sports betting for especially college students? And Jason, if you want to take over this question first, go ahead.
Jason, I think you're muted. Can anyone else hear him?
No, I can't hear him.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, there we go.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Well, I built the anticipation for my answer. Yes, I think sports betting is definitely a growing issue. Just in the last month with March Madness, it's been estimated that about $3.1 billion was spent on sports betting. The Super Bowl in one night was estimated about $1.4 billion. So it's definitely growing in these areas. I think it's really affecting college students. About 67% of college students are betting with higher frequency. Around 6% of college students have problem gambling, and that's higher than kind of the average gambler in the normal population. So it's definitely picking up. It's definitely becoming more popular. Just in about 2019, the gross gambling revenue for sports betting was about 0.9 billion, so less than a billion. By 2020, that surged to 1.5, and by 2022, we're at 93.7 billion. So this is just really, really exploding. It's really becoming more and more of a problem. I think it's also coming up in new ways. I just saw a commercial today for FanDuel now has a casino. So I think people are getting into, these companies are getting into different methods as some of the more popular sports are coming to a close, maybe transitioning into casino bettings. I also have seen crypto casinos. So they're getting kind of more creative with different types of online sports betting and online casinos.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely have noticed a big surge, especially, since I've gotten to college as well. So thank you for that. Would anyone else like to add anything to that? Okay. All right. Next question. What are the psychological effects of gambling and how does it compare to other addictive behaviors? Oh,
I'd,
and John, would you like to answer that one?
yeah, I'd be happy to speak to especially one part of it that I think doesn't get much attention and not a lot of people think about, which is correlations with suicide. Not many people know this, but people who have problematic gambling patterns actually have higher suicide rates. They have higher rates of suicide attempts, and they have higher rates of having suicidal thoughts. So typically, with problematic gambling behaviors, we kind of anticipate those individuals to undergo a lot of stress, anxiety, possibly depression. Maybe it starts to impact relationships, certainly starts to impact financial well-being and things like that. The problem with gambling, problematic gambling, when you compare it to other addictions, is that most other addictions, when you look at the course of them, the time it takes for an individual to really reach a crisis point with addictive substances or other addictions usually takes place over a much longer period of time. And when you look at problematic gambling, some kind of crisis can actually happen very suddenly and very rapidly, usually in the form of huge financial losses that then lead that individual to really feel extreme hopelessness very acutely and very quickly. And if they feel like there are no outs or no options for them, especially if they could be in legal or criminal trouble with lenders and things like that, then that's a really bad formula that can increase suicide risk.
Thank you, John. Would anyone else like to add anything? All right. And I will add that after we define the problem, we'll get into the resources that Penn State has as well. So, yeah. And the next question, can sports betting become addictive? So, Mike, would you like to take that one? And you
Yeah,
can also reintroduce yourself as well.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Aiden, and I appreciate everyone on the call. My name is Mike Miltenberger. I work within health promotion and wellness, overseeing our alcohol and cannabis education, but also our problem gambling service. And as Aiden has said, that is a free service to all students utilizing an SBIRT model, which is screening, brief intervention, referral for treatment. So when it comes down to sports betting, can it be addictive, right? So DSM-5 actually considers gambling disorder as a behavior addiction. Okay. And I'll kind of explain as to how, it might be, well, is it a habit? Is it an addiction? Kind of explain how those kind of link up. So, one, when a person is experiencing any type of pleasure, dopamine is released through our rewards and pleasure pathways within the brain. Okay. And what these do is these can lead to a habit, feeling that dopamine rush, feeling that that pleasure that's there can continually lead to habits. And where the transition of habit to addiction comes into play is habits, behaviors that are done regularly, often, they're under conscious control and they can be broken easily with some effort. Where it transitions into an addiction is when it becomes compulsive, despite those consequences. So a compulsive behavior, despite the negative consequences, and certainly strong cravings and loss of control. So that's where that transition occurs. Now, with that as well, Dr. Anna Lemke wrote a book in 2021 called Dopamine Nation, or entitled Dopamine Nation, which is finding the balance in the age of indulgence. And Dr. Lemke is a professor and medical director of addiction medicine at Stanford University School of Medicine. And her book is really interesting, and it talks about the indulgence or the stimulus that is out there in this society where now everything is instant gratification. One of the concepts that she talks about in the book is this pleasure and pain balance. So if we think of that as a scale with a fulcrum in the center, pleasure on one side, pain on the other. When one places a bet and receives a reward, dopamine is released. So we feel that pleasure kind of tip down and that the pain goes up. But what may happen with that individual is as the body tries to reach homeostasis, there needs to be some pain there. So this constant seeking of pleasure is where the habit can then turn into an addiction where one is constantly gambling, or one must place a higher bet or take more risk involved when it comes to receive that same pleasure to bring that balance back. The nice thing is with the book as well, she goes through a really a good way on how that can be brought back to homeostasis, where we can have some potential harm reduction based strategies, which we'll probably talk about here a little bit later, where we can bring that balance back without the need for any type of gambling to ensue. So certainly a habit certainly can transition over to addiction. Certainly DSM-5 considers gambling as a behavior addiction.
I didn't know that. That makes sense. And I've definitely noticed, when it comes to things like TikTok and just other apps on your phone, I can kind of relate that to gambling. It's something impulsive. When I open my phone, I immediately go to Instagram, or when gambling, like I'm sure people all the time just immediately go to gambling apps. And since it's right on your phone, super easy to access. So that brings me into my next question for you. How does, sports betting enterprises specifically target people, and college students like myself?
Yeah, and this was really an interesting thing, and I've had discussions with other colleagues regarding this, and there's essentially two different ways, but certainly anyone on the panel can add to. I'm going to talk about the ads here in a second, but really the free plays and this is an easy win, or the risk-free bonuses. Certainly FanDuel will offer $150 on your first bet. Those types of things are very enticing. I must say as well that we understand that the brain is not fully developed until the age of 25. So adolescents and college students are really a target audience for this. And that'll make a little bit more sense here in a second. But in terms of like athletic events, I know we talked about, and I think it was Jason that brought up the March Madness was going on. So certainly during these athletic events, a lot of these ads tend to run. And Michelle Malkin, who's an associate professor of criminal justice from East Carolina University, in 2023, she had an interview that was conducted by, or I should say published, by the U.S. News and World Report. And she said, I quote, "When it comes to young people, emerging adults, those people on college campuses, there's just not that much information out there on how to engage in gambling in a healthy way." And a lot of this comes from that thinking things through. What are the risks should I engage in this behavior? Or if one chooses to engage in a positive behavior, what might be the risks? What might be the outcomes? So she added to that as well, quote, "The problem is that most young people wouldn't know what the signs are to say that they have a gambling problem or have a problem with gambling because their friends are doing it too." So certainly there might be this peer pressure that might be out there as well that could potentially influence other students to have a behavior that is aligned with their friends' behavior. So that's one. Now, the NCAA commissioned a study in April 2023 on sports betting activities. It was a survey. So this surveyed approximately 3,500 students from the ages of 18 to 22. 63% on-campus students recall seeing sports betting ads. And from that 63%, 58% of those students indicated that they were more likely to bet after seeing the ad. And I'll get into the ads here in a second. But also some interesting statistics that came out from that. Sports betting activities, for example. 58% engaged in at least one sports betting activity. That would be placing a bet on a mobile phone, which was at 28%, play daily fantasy sports on a mobile app, 25%, or participate in some sort of betting pool, around 18%. So some advertisement betting effects. Individuals that had indicated that they made a bet were more likely, 15%, to engage in that practice again, and somewhat more likely, 38%. So very high numbers when we look at just seeing an ad and placing a bet and continuing to do so. And the motive behind it, which was really interesting, that 70% of risky gamblers believe consistent sports betting will increase monetary earnings. So this goes back to essentially what I alluded to before, that constant chase to make the money back, to bring that balance back, or to, from the pain, pleasure, to balance it out, bring that homeostasis back. So let me talk about the ads now, and this is the really interesting part. So these sports betting organizations utilize colors, and certainly maybe some on the call here and on the panel would know this as well, that there is a psychology to color use that is used. Certainly, a lot of these colors can influence a person's mood, their motivation, their perceptions. Certainly, something like BetMGM uses a lot of darker colors, black, gold, these colors that kind of invoke this high society, a lot of bubbles in the background, champagne being had, or even some neon colors that can invoke excitement, such as what FanDuel utilizes. You'll see confetti on the ads as well. So it's certainly one of these things that not only is it the ad itself that leads to it, but it's also what is incorporated within the ad that could certainly lead to an individual and how they target those younger individuals.
And I'll also add, I feel like I can't even watch sports anymore without constant gambling ads and then something going with your promotion take. When I turned 21, immediately all of my friends sent me links saying, use my code, like we'll both get free money with it. And I did and used everyone's link and it kind of hooked me right in and that's how they get you. And you're right, it's everywhere, especially with advertisements. Anyone else want to add anything with, specifically how gambling sites target you?
I would love to speak to how they target addiction potential. And what I mean by that is, and by the way, again, I'm John, I'm a psychologist at CAP. Sorry, I didn't say that before, Aiden. Um, if you look at the history of gambling, gambling used to be what we would call a slow bet game. And what we mean by that is in the older days, and when I say older days, I'm talking about like 70s and 80s, that kind of thing. When you gambled on sports, when you placed a bet, you usually placed a bet on which team would win. Okay. Whether that was baseball, football, basketball, whatever. Okay. Or you would do something like March Madness. You're still looking at the outcome of games. And it would take a while for you to get a result. You would have to obviously wait till the end of a game. Nowadays, if you look at how gambling has evolved, it's evolved into a rapid bet, multiple bet enterprise that betting companies want you to engage in. So now we have small bets. So for example, the Super Bowl, you can bet on as much money as you want on whether the coin flip will end up being heads or tails. Okay. You can bet on what specific player from which team might score the first touchdown, might score the last touchdown. And you start to accrue all these smaller bets over time. Not only is the individual gambler more likely to lose money because the odds of all those small bets are quite low in terms of winning, but the addictive potential of that and the rapid pace at which you can actually make bets, what Mike referred to as chasing their losses, just becomes so much more intense and powerful. And by the way, the gambling companies know that. They actually have psychologists, psychological experts like Jason and I, not Jason and I, we don't serve on those companies, but they have people like us to actually form their algorithms to make gambling behaviors more compulsive for their consumers. So just something for, consumers of sports betting to really be aware of.
Yeah, and
Thank
go
you.
ahead, Jason.
Maybe also kind of key into kind of aspects of gamblers. I think there's some gamblers that are kind of gambling to escape, and it's kind of a distraction, and they're using it for that. And then there's like big action gamblers that they're trying to win a lot of money and have that excitement. And I think the advertisements are kind of targeting both avenues of that.
Yeah, and what I just wanted to add to what John and Jason have said is, when you have these smaller bets, well, let's look at what's the negative thing. It's only $5, right? So, but it's that same type of dopamine that we're looking for that John had alluded to, right? So it might seem quite small, but when we add everything up, it can certainly have an effect on the financial side as well as stress, anxiety, things of that nature that it can bring about as well.
Eden, I'm so glad that you shared some of your personal experience as well. I think even in a good-natured way, uh, our peers might be like, "Oh yeah, watch the game with me and bet," and it's just kind of like now part of the game. It's just part of being there, part of the culture, and so that's not necessarily the company doing that, but I think that is just another way that they're kind of pulling students in and pulling in.
Yeah, I honestly don't know if I'd ever would have gambled before if it wasn't for my friends showing me how to. In freshman year, before I was even 21, I was taught how to gamble. So, it just because it's illegal it didn't mean like it was hard for your average student to figure out how to gamble. So that's all out there, and I really appreciate all you guys talking about, how predatory advertisements can really be. Moving on to the next question, Julie, this one's specifically for you. How does gambling impact financial well-being, and what are the long-term consequences of problem gambling on students' financial futures?
Yeah, no, and just echoing, I so appreciate this conversation. So Julie Heaton, director of the Financial and Life Skills Center, and I'm a accredited financial counselor as well. So I think something that I talk a lot about when I'm educating folks is just being an informed consumer, right? Making conscious decisions about what you're buying and how you're spending your money. But what is interesting about this topic is that sort of in the same way that we sort of know when we go into a store or something that the store's goal is like to maximize the amount of money we spend. And I think because gambling has become so accessible, like on our phone and in environments that like we don't recognize that we're just going over to a friend's house or we're getting together with a group of folks at the bar. We were planning to like purchase, a drink or something like that. But like the total financial cost, the informed consumer potential there, it kind of goes down because you're not anticipating one, they're kind of emotionally hijacking you into spending more than you plan to, but that's their goal, right? They want you to maximize spending, but you're not necessarily ready for that. Like I walk into a store or a restaurant and like I'm anticipating what the meal is going to cost. Whereas if I go over to a friend's house to watch the game, I might not be anticipating how much that actually could cost me. And I can't make an informed decision prior to that event. Because once you're sort of in it, you're in it, right? So I want to make that point of like, in general, when we talk about financial wellness, this is a legal activity, right? This is something you can do that you can get enjoyment from, just like you can get enjoyment from purchasing something. But the moment that kind of slips into like you're no longer making kind of executive decisions, you're not at the wheel anymore, then it is kind of something to check and be like, oh man, like I'm just driving blind here. I'm not making informed decisions. So I want to mention that piece first. The kind of overall goal is not that you necessarily don't engage in legal activities as an adult, right? The overall goal is that you feel like you're at the wheel, you're in charge, you're the informed consumer, you're making decisions about where your money goes and not kind of the other way around, right? Someone else is sort of like getting you into this space where you're not in charge anymore. So as far as kind of the financial well-being impact and kind of these long-term consequences on your financial future. So there's the obvious, there's financial stress that comes from being in debt, right? Or not knowing if you're going to have enough money or not knowing how much you're going to spend and not feeling in control of your finances. Control and financial management are kind of two of those linked. The feeling is linked with the skill, right? So financial stress can increase if you get into trouble with gambling or even just owing a lot of debts, even if you're paying them, right? Basic needs insecurity can be affected, right? There are folks that if they have an addiction issue, right? They have a mental health issue, but that could actually have very real impacts on their day-to-day finances and their ability to make payments on basic needs, their housing, their food. And so, although we definitely draw a pretty clear line in personal finance from saying, gambling and problems and addiction and a mental health issue, that doesn't mean that there aren't very real financial issues for folks that have addictive gambling tendencies. So basic need insecurity is a big one of just if you're having trouble paying for your basic needs because of your financing and gaming habit, that's something to definitely look at. Credit card debt is another one, right? If folks are using credit mechanisms to pay for their gambling, or if you're just in a lot of credit card debt because of gambling, right? So not always people identify that as necessarily a negative thing. Depends on how you view credit card debt. But if you're consistently not being able to pay off your credit card balance and just paying a basic minimum each month or not paying it at all, then we're into this space that can signal kind of, oh, we have a financial crisis going on or a financial issue. I say all of that, and I think shame is wrapped up in each one of those things. So people feel a lot of shame about their spending, a lot of shame about being in debt. And so I think that also builds and actually makes it worse because they're going to be less likely to acknowledge both the financial issue and potentially the addiction issue, both of which need to be addressed simultaneously in some of these cases. So then let me switch gears a little bit into kind of just talking about the nuts and bolts of what is enforceable from a gambling debt perspective. So these long-term financial outcomes that aren't necessarily like psychological or day-to-day basic needs, but like what can happen if you aren't, you can't pay a debt. And so in some states, gambling debt is enforceable. And in most cases, it's going to be, meaning that there can be civil lawsuits or suing if you can't pay a debt collection. So your debt can go to a collection if you don't pay the debt to like a casino, something like that. Usually you'll get warnings about this, but it can go to collections, which means that you'll have fees associated with that. And not to mention it is not fun and it's very stressful to get calls from debt collectors. The big obvious one, credit reporting, right? Even if you're just carrying a credit card balance from month to month, that's going to impact your credit. But especially if you're not paying on a debt or it's gone to collections, there's things that are going to follow you for 7 to 10 years potentially, not being able to pay, and having your credit score and impacted long term. And then finally, like court ordered asset seizure is even something that can happen from a financial point of view. If this is, you went to a casino or you gambled online, things like that. And ultimately it goes past that debt collection phase. That is something that can happen. So there's very real like legal consequences, mostly in the civil sector, but it is possible too to have criminal charges associated with folks who have gambling problems. Just because there are cases where it can be tried as fraud or even writing a bad check, things like that. And so there's legal implications as well. I'm not a fun person to talk to about this, am I? Right. So, I think the other piece of it, we're talking about really the serious cases here, but on a low key, like maybe, and I think a lot of students are in this space where it's like they know that they're kind of being hijacked a little bit in this and they're spending more money than they want to. But I think that even carries a lot of low key stress for their finances, right? They're not feeling like they have the executive functioning and power to kind of take control of their money. And again, I think a lot of that falls back into shame and they just feel bad about managing their money. And that's not very motivating to like accomplish other financial goals that they have.
I completely agree. Did you have anything to add, Jason?
I do. I think some cases, sadly, sometimes students might actually spend their tuition and might have to leave school for a period of time, or maybe a family member have spent tuition or money intended for college, and that can be a really other really sad consequence that can come out of gambling and sports betting if it's pretty extreme.
Right? Yeah, like impacts to your overall like academic life, but you can't pursue a degree to the end. That can impact so many other pieces of your life too.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, and you would certainly know more about this, Julie, but when winning a certain amount, there's also taxes that need to be paid on that, right? So being able to file those taxes and understand that the winnings aren't the winnings, because you got to pay taxes out of that, right? So certainly when it comes down to it, as Julie had said, leading to that financial stress and the anxiety, where potential debt collectors are coming after you, or even, not paying taxes on those winnings could be a detriment as well.
Yeah, and I
They're
know
not
that,
marketing that, right? They're not
yeah,
saying, oh yeah, this isn't the actual total earning.
Certainly not.
Right.
and I know that they have really high taxes too. So there's so much that goes into it. Thank you, thank you. And now I want to dive into our resources, and this is something that I think is really important, especially as a student at Penn State, knowing what's available if you're going through gambling, if you just want to learn more about, how you could help a friend or yourself. We're going to talk a little bit about what's available for you. So, first question is, who on campus can help with sports betting and gambling? And Mike, do you want to start off with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Aiden had said earlier in our hour here, and as I've alluded to, Health Promotion and Wellness offers a free, completely confidential 1 hour problem gambling service. And with that service, excuse me, with that service, there's various screenings that we would do in that service, which I'll get into here in a moment. But that service is intended for an individual to, or for a student to come in. We have some screenings to be taken, and we'll certainly talk in our session about having that brief intervention. What are some harm reduction strategies? Certainly enhancing motivation. What are the pros and cons of gambling? Addressing any cognitive dissonance that's there. So holding those two conflicting ideas on, the gambling as well as life goals or academic goals, whatever they might be. And certainly highlighting the connection between gambling behavior and those related consequences, which is huge. So that service is completely free of charge, and that can be an appointment that's made by calling our office or emailing promotinghealth@psu.edu. All of our information is on our website. I know that is being put in the chat right now. And certainly with wrapping that up, that other side, so that brief intervention is where we come into play. And then that referral for treatment goes on to Smart Recovery or to other resources that might be available. So I'm hoping Jason or John can talk a little bit about that Smart Recovery piece.
Thanks for highlighting that, Mike. Yeah, Smart Recovery is a group that is offered. It's a peer support group that's kind of led with 2 facilitators, myself and Lori Strayer, a colleague of mine. Really what we're looking for are students that are looking to make different choices in life. So a lot of times that can be choices with like alcohol and drugs, wanting to be abstinent or reduce use. But we're also seeing more students come into the group with problem gambling concerns, pornography concerns, screen addiction. So this can be a really good resource. What's really nice about Smart Recovery is it's really based in science, and there's a lot of good skills and techniques that you're learned in your time in Smart Recovery that you can kind of apply. It's free. It's a drop-in service, so you don't have to do any paperwork or anything beforehand. So yeah, you could definitely look that up on the CAPS webpage. It's Mondays from 4 to 5 in the Pascarella Center. So thanks for highlighting that, Mike.
Yeah, and one more thing that I wanted to add with that too, the SBIRT model, the Screening Brief Intervention Referral for Treatment, was developed by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. So it certainly is rooted in evidence-based practice for individuals with a wide variety of various behaviors, but certainly in this case, more specifically, problem gambling.
Thank you, thank you. And I will add, just to double say again, that these resources are in chat. Feel free to check them out. And also, again, if anyone has any questions, use the Q&A function. We're here to help. And yeah, the next question will be for Julie. Julie, what resources are available for managing debt, especially, I guess, debt for something like gambling?
Yeah, so I think the first one I want to highlight, I just put in the chat, is the financialliteracy.psu.edu, which will bring you to the financial and life skills, which is where Aiden and I both work. And the Financial and Life Skills Center is a place for you to bring any of your money questions, money management questions. And so for a student that is struggling with debt as the result of gambling, again, we're less on that mental health side and more on helping you sort of navigate the skills to minimize your debt and improve your overall financial wellness picture. So we can help you with that piece of it. Definitely seek these other resources first and also. But what would you do if you came in with sort of debt management and questions and wanted to develop a plan with a financial counselor? So you could book a one-on-one coaching or counseling session. So there's professional financial counselors. There's also peer mentors that can take debt management one-on-ones. Aiden is actually one of them. So he's one of our senior ambassadors and is certified to do those appointments as well. So those meetings are going to look like sitting down, meeting with the counselor, kind of first acknowledging the debt, taking a look at it, talking about it, and making really a list of what debts are owed and getting some of the terms and conditions on each of those types of debt. So debt management is not necessarily a one size fits all, because depending on sort of what types of debt you're in, you could have credit card debt in addition to sort of immediate loans or debts made to a specific casino or gambling platform, right? And we're going to have to treat those differently based on kind of the urgency, the amount, the interest rate, all sorts of things that need to be considered. And so there's not really a one size fits all of like what to do in every person's situation. It really is good to sit down with someone and look at these and come up with a strategy for how to repay. A lot of times students will talk about kind of debt management strategies as like a snowball or an avalanche, right? So which type of debt do you sort of attack first? And there's a lot of psychological benefits to really motivate you to pay down debt, because it can be really overwhelming, and there's a tendency to not want to look at it, right? And so that strategy, and also having kind of an accountability buddy, a peer, a coach, or a counselor to really help you look at that and make wise decisions around it is a great idea. There's also services beyond the center as well. So there's debt counseling that is available at different nonprofits. There are credit repair and counseling agencies. I'll put in the chat some of the links here just in a minute of places where they're state approved nonprofits that will help people deal with debt management and do credit repair. Those are some really important places to go. Again, we can do some of the education and assistance and skill building around that, but in someone who has, serious debt implications, they might want to work with a specific credit counselor to do some credit repair. Sometimes those conversations will lead to filing bankruptcy. That's kind of the heavy, last resort option, but it is something that some folks who go into debt because of a gambling addiction or another reason, or just sort of overall debt picture, might have to, that is an option available, right? You don't want to, that's not your first option, right? So definitely working with a credit counselor and a financial counselor first to see if that is even something you need to consider. In most cases, it's not going to be. Debt consolidation and debt settlement. Really what that means is that there's vehicles that we can minimize the negative impacts of the debt itself, or we can change the debt in ways that's going to make it easier to pay. So consolidation would just be like finding there's ways to get the loans essentially kind of refinanced with a lesser interest rate or something that's going to impact you less negatively. For folks that have good credit, there's really good options for this. Like you can even get 0% credit consolidation loans to help you manage that debt, give you a period of breathing room so that you can knock down some of the debt without that interest accruing. Credit cards here are going to be some of our worst enemies, right? You're looking sometimes at interest rates over 20%. It's so hard to dig yourself out of that hole. And so speaking with the credit card company directly is a great option. Really, this is true of any lender. Go to them directly and ask what options there are. You'd be shocked at, I just saw this the other day in one of my appointments, someone turning a 24% APR credit interest rate into a 2% for 60 months, right? I mean, like it's incredible because the credit card companies want to be paid, right? The debt collectors want to be paid. And so they will work with you. So debt consolidation loans, and then also debt settlement. That's kind of that settling. You can do this in a legal setting, or sometimes you can do it directly with the lender. So I think if you hear anything from that list is, one, there's people who can help you navigate this. And two, go directly at the problem, right? Go directly at the problem, address the people that you need to work with, answer the call from the collections agency, even though you don't want to work with them, and see what your options are, but also get that professional help that's available to you. If you hear anything from this, just come talk to us in the center and we can set you up with what you need.
Thank you, Julie. And I've really realized, I guess there's two main areas of resources. There's the psychological resources we have and the financial resources. So that makes me feel good as a student knowing that both of those are there. Would anyone like to add any other resources before we move on to the scenarios?
Aiden, just a quick note. Jason already mentioned Smart Recovery, which is one of our drop-in groups for students. We also do at CAPS offer individual therapy services. So if a student wanted to see a therapist individually, we offer short-term treatment, which usually means up to 6 sessions that are free to the student. They don't get billed and their insurance doesn't get billed. And that all gets started once a student calls CAPS, our main office, and we set up a phone screening to kind of assess what concerns they have, and then we go from there.
And I'll add one more as well in the chat, student legal services, right? A lot of students do not realize that there are lawyers working here at Penn State that want to help you out with any legal issues you have. So if this gets into that legal, I mentioned that this can result in lawsuits, civil, and even criminal. If you're in any kind of those situations, right, that's another person on your team, right?
Thank you. Yes, I'm glad all these resources are available, and I have used legal services before. That's a great one as well. So moving on to scenarios, I think these are really great questions because I can relate to a lot of them. And the first one, I'm just going to open up to anyone who wants to answer. How can I talk to a friend that I think might have a problem with sports betting or gambling, and how can I approach that situation?
Think it can always be helpful to come at a place of compassion, and kind of like kind of be concerned and show that you care about them, and kind of ask kind of what's kind of going on, and kind of having it from that vantage point. I think it's good, if you're going to be approaching someone, to recognize like, hey, you actually have a lot of things that you can control. Like, you can't control how the whole conversation is going to go, but you can think about like, well, where would be a good place to have this conversation? Would it be good to have it kind of in a neutral space? Or if it's a roommate, would it make sense to be in the room? Would it be helpful to have someone else who's also caring kind of be part of that? Um, uh, if it's likely to be like a difficult confrontation, like maybe even to have some bullet points, not like a whole like case file and make them feel really bad about it, but just something on your phone or just something written out to be able to kind of go through what you want to talk about. You could be aware of some some warning signs. I think that can be really helpful. If they're really preoccupied with gambling, if they're gambling more frequently, if they're defensive about their gambling or lying, if they have a irritability, mood swings, using gambling to cope with stress or pressure, if they're having more anxiety or depression, or just lying about gambling or where their money's going, those can be some warning signs. I think we're putting some of those in the chat. So, just going from a place of concern, talking about that, having some things kind of written out ahead of time, maybe having some resources. Some of the ones that we've talked about today could be really helpful, so that you're not feeling like, oh, now I've become my roommates, or now I've become my best friend's therapist. But like, you know what, I can be really concerned about them and then help them kind of get the resources they need, maybe connecting with HPW, maybe connecting with CAPS. Sometimes it can be scary to make that call or make that first step. So even doing that with them can be helpful, and just saying like, hey, we could just, I could be in the room and you could call and set up an appointment, or something like that. But just being supportive, being caring, and coming from a place of concern, I think can be really helpful.
Yeah, and I also think with that may make it a bit easier too, in to go along with what Jason has just said, is really thinking about, using a lot of open-ended questions, right? Like, tell me a little bit about how gambling is affecting your academics, or things of that nature. So really thinking about not using those closed-ended questions where it really feels like a person is being like grilled, but using more open-ended and hearing from their perspective, right? And that really kind of opens up that door to a positive positive communication where then maybe some resources can be put in there. And certainly, as Jason has said, coming from compassion and a point of concern tends to go over a lot more, so an individual doesn't feel as though they're being, grilled on, their gambling use is a problem, or, this is affecting our relationship this way, right? So thinking about those open-ended questions, in short, anything that ends in a yes or no is closed-ended. Anything that doesn't is an open-ended, is kind of my rule of thumb.
Thank you so much. Moving on to the next one. This one's specifically for you, John. What are some common myths about gambling?
And I think one of the biggest ones is that gambling is not addictive. And because oftentimes people view it not as a substance that they're using, that they're ingesting in some way, that they're kind of putting into their body. I think it's generally a finding among college students that behavioral and compulsions and behavioral addictions are just less known about. Jason mentioned earlier the concept of porn addiction, screen addiction, that can include internet addiction. And obviously, we're talking about gambling addiction. So I think that's one of the bigger myths. I also think a related myth to that is when you look at behavioral compulsions and behavioral addictions, um, even though like a catastrophic kind of loss, if we're talking about gambling specifically, might not happen for someone, it can slowly over time chip away at someone's mental health and emotional health, and certainly financial well-being, like Julie was pointing out. So it might feel a little bit like under someone's control because nothing majorly bad has happened. I didn't lose, like half my savings, or I didn't end up, chasing a lot of my losses with huge bets and things like that. But over time, small amounts of compulsive use of gambling can be problematic over that course of time and still create a lot of damage in someone's life.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. All the small bets adding up, I can really see that. Um, Next question would be what are tips if you do decide to gamble? This one's for you, Mike. If I'm deciding to gamble, what are some tips to stay out of trouble?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will try to do this quick. I know we want to leave space for any questions that we may have. So the National Council on Problem Gambling actually has a toolkit that has a lot of resources there if one is choosing to participate in gambling. Thinking about when gambling is no longer fun, take a break, right? As that, and I keep going back to the dopamine that's there and having that balance. When it's no longer eliciting that same type of response, maybe it is time to take a break. Certainly treating gambling as a form of entertainment, as John has alluded to, right? It's not something that we're putting in, but if we treat it as such and not make it about the money, right? We treat it as entertainment. That could be a good strategy as well. Certainly setting a budget. This goes to what Julie had said, setting a budget. If one is going to place bets and participate in gambling, have a budget. Only spend what you can afford, and chasing the losses can lead to that financial stress, right? So if we have that budget, we need to stick to it as well. Balancing gambling with other activities, right? Walking, exercise, visiting a friend, it can have that same type of a dopamine effect on our brains. Creating a personal betting plan. Maybe it is asking friends for support. Certainly in this time in college, friends are very important. And when we have a friend there, not only, as Jason has said, with some of those difficult conversations, but certainly having those friends and supporting one another in having that plan and carrying that plan out. And for the last little bit here, and of course, there's many ways to kind of think about this. But again, I would refer everyone to that National Council on Problem Gambling toolkit. But one of the other things too is simultaneous alcohol or other substance use with gambling, right? Alcohol or other substances affect our prefrontal cortex. And Julie had alluded to this before, that prefrontal cortex is where all of our executive functioning is at, decision making, judgment, reasoning. And certainly while that's impaired under the alcohol, it can lead to the potential of poor decision making or increase risk taking, particularly when it comes to gambling. So those are just a few that come to mind if one is looking to participate in gambling, ways to kind of maybe do it in a safer manner.
I'll add two quick ones to that. One is legal gambling only is a great way to just make sure that you don't get in a really bad situation. Also because of fraud. I'm not going to get into all of the types of fraud that exists with this, but that's one thing. And then another just great option anytime you're planning to sports bet, whether you're walking into a casino or doing it on your phone or going to the game, you know that's going to be an option. Like just don't pull out the credit card, right? Have a set amount of money that you know that you're going to spend before going in. And that can be, and tell somebody, right? Like, again, this could be a legal, fun, exciting activity. You and your buddy being like, hey, how much are you going to put there? I'm not going to spend more than $50 today, right? And be honest and accountable for that. So
I would say probably bet on things you understand. We're hearing a lot about like people are like, oh, I'm really into football, and then football season's over, and then they're like, oh, okay, basketball, and then they're like, darts, or just really bizarre sports that aren't really common in our culture. We might be betting on that we don't understand, or starting to go into casinos and playing games and things that we don't fully understand. That's a setup for frustration and loss.
Yeah, that's a
Thank you.
good
And
point, Jason. Definitely knowing the game and knowing that the stakes are on the house, they are in their favor, is another way to definitely think about when looking at.
yeah, and I wanted to add two things to that. One, yes, the stakes are in the house. That's something that I've definitely really noticed is, the odds are not on your side. Statistically, you are not supposed to win. It's always going to be in the house favor. And that was something that kind of helped me slow down on gambling. Just knowing that it's not a financially good decision. And then the other thing, for when my friends and myself included, wanted to stop gambling, but they keep getting pressure to go back. One good way to kind of eliminate that option for yourself is to use this resource. Jason, you put it in our chat. You could speak on it for a second. It's self-exclusion from gambling websites.
Yeah,
So yeah, I'll put that in the chat.
yeah, I want to save time for questions, but it's basically just what it sounds like, and you can kind of do it on different things. Like if casinos are what you want to exclude from, you can kind of do that. You can do it for a period of time, or you can do it for a lifetime. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So moving into the Q&As, the first question is, I've noticed YouTube is flooded with sports betting ads, despite the age restriction minors use on YouTube all the time. Would these ads lead to increased gambling addictions in specifically adolescents?
I can feel that. So, starting out, it's actually pretty nefarious, what the gambling industry is trying to do with youth. If you look at video games aimed at younger children, I don't mean children that are of betting age, I mean literally younger children. They have now started to incorporate little mini betting games into children's video games. And so the goal there is to get children, they're not betting real money, they're just betting like gold coins and things like that that are part of the video game. But they're priming these youth to then get comfortable and somewhat knowledgeable about what betting actually means. And if that doesn't make your blood boil, then I don't know what will. So I would say yes, not only ads, but also video games, things like that, priming our youth. Interestingly, there are countries in Europe, for example, the UK, has banned any celebrities from being part of gambling ads. And Italy has banned any gambling ads altogether being on TV. So those are some nice kind of social interventions that I wish we did more of here.
Yeah, I've seen in the last conference I went to, little kids, like third graders, playing Roblox, which is not a gambling, it's not a casino, but there's a way in there to donate the currency in that to each other, and you have to buy that through a gift card, credit card, something like that. So they'll do things like rock, paper, scissors. If I win, you have to donate to me. So they're finding creative ways that aren't necessarily even part of the game, to actually exchange real money, and parents are getting on the hook for big bills, credit card bills that they don't really, oh, you might just be getting a loot box or something like that, but they're actually betting some money. There's some really interesting YouTube videos about people doing that, kind of teaching how to do that, uh, really glamorizing it, and yeah, it's pretty bad.
Right. Yeah, that's an important note of, if you've got your credit card attached to a video game that you're playing, or you like buy fake gemstones to like do, get to the next level. That's kind of the same thing we're talking about, right? Like it's not placing a bet necessarily, but it's that same sort of dopamine response. And don't link your credit card would be like a good sign of like, okay, if maybe you do want to buy something in a game to like level up, just don't save your credit card, right? That gives you one less barrier.
Yeah, and I agree. And going back to what I said earlier, everywhere I look, there's gambling promotions. Even the microphones that, the announcers hold when they're talking and announcing has like the gambling logo on it. And it's everywhere. And I think it really goes to show that you almost can't get away from it. And it's important to be aware of everything that we've talked about. The next question is really good, and I was also curious about this. So, what resources that we've talked to, and I guess general resources for gambling, are available for PSU alumni?
I put in a few in the chat, but Gamblers Anonymous would be a good one. That's a pretty extensive one. I think the closest Gambler Anonymous in-person meeting to State College is going to be Altoona, unfortunately, but there's a lot of virtual centers. There's also 1-800-GAMBLER, where you can call the hotline. That could be a good one. I think those could be great places to start. I threw a couple other in the chat, so.
I'll say for us, we do serve alumni. So if you're an alumni of Penn State and you want to make an appointment, you'll just email finlit@psu.edu. I'll put that in the chat. Especially around debt management is where we serve them, because a lot of student loan debt is generally what appointments we get. But if you're somebody who's struggling with debt management because of gambling addiction or anything like that, still reach out.
Yeah,
Smart Recovery is also a national meeting, kind of similar to AA. So we have a chapter here for Penn State students that are enrolled, but that will be an international program as well, and there's online meetings as well.
well, just to wrap things up, if there's anything else anyone wants to add, feel free to add right now.
There is one question that came in the chat. It's a little bit specific, and I don't know that I have the answer to this, but they're asking about if these conversations happen within the interfraternity council. Because I do know that, I think that they're commenting that sometimes, like, as part of like the pledging process, folks have been required to make bets. I'm just going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say like that's not going to be endorsed by the university in any way, shape, or form, that people would have to kind of make financial bets as part of that. But yeah, anyone else have an answer to that? Yeah, I'm not aware of this conversation.
Student code of conduct with the hazing policies.
Yeah, hazing policies,
falls
right.
underneath AD 98, which is hazing policy for sure. So to be fair, I am unfamiliar with that. That'd probably be something good for the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life to answer, as well as maybe student conduct that oversees organizations and things of that nature.
That's happening at Penn State, then definitely get in touch with conduct and let them know. All right, one more question just came in, and I think it's a good one. We'll end with this one. Any advice on what to tell a loved one or friend who feels as though they're making money on these gambling sites and are in denial about being addicted to betting?
So I think, like our other kind of advice in terms of just talking with someone, certainly approaching that with compassion. I was going to add during that section, do it face to face. because over text, and we're talking to this generation of college students where a lot of relationship communication happens over text. Do it face to face. You're going to be able to convey your concern and your compassion and your care a lot more directly and a lot more evidently. And the odds will catch up with someone winning. That's just always the reality of gambling. I really liked Mike's point about sports betting as entertainment. It can stay fun. It can stay very much in control when you approach it as entertainment. But if you're trying to increase wealth, it is not a viable strategy. You will ultimately lose in the end.
And those are
Yeah.
the real odds.
Nice ending there. Nice plug, Julie.
Zing.
There it is.
That was so well done. That was a mic drop right there, Julie.
All right.
Well, if no one has anything else to add, I just want to take a second and thank everyone for coming, especially Julie, Mike, John, and Jason. I actually can't thank you enough. This is something that I've been really passionate about because I've seen it affect my own mental health, but especially, my friends and the people that I really care about too. And I see it literally everywhere, especially as a college student. So I can't thank you enough, and thank all the participants for coming as well. Hopefully, you're able to share something that you learned today or share a resource with yourself or your friends. So, yeah, thank you so much. And that's pretty much it for me. Yeah.
Thank you, Aiden.
Thanks,
This is
Aiden.
this is out of your compassion and care for others. So I just want to note that this is amazing that you brought this to our attention to do a panel. So thanks everyone for coming.